She was 18 and had just been kicked out. No warning she could point to, no goodbye worth remembering. Just a carpetbag set on the porch boards, a door latched from the inside, and a stepmother's voice through the glass telling her the arrangement had run its course. And with the last dollar she had, she bought a boarded-up gold assay office in a fading mining town high in the Colorado mountains, a building the county had been trying to give away for a decade. The roof sagged over the front room. The windows were shuttered with warped planks. The banker who handled the tax sale told her the vault inside hadn't been opened in 25 years, that the man who built it had died, broke and bitter, and that she'd be wiser to spend her dollar on a train ticket anywhere else. But what nobody knew, not the banker, not the town, not the girl herself, was that behind the back wall of that old vault, sealed away since 1866, was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Etta Rowan had been good with numbers before she was good at anything else. She was born in 1873 on a dryland farm in eastern Kansas, the kind of place where the wind never quite stopped and the ledger never quite balanced, and by the time she was 9 years old, she was the one keeping that ledger. Her mother had taught her, a quiet, careful woman who wrote figures the way other people said prayers, in the belief that a true number was a kind of honesty the world could not argue with. Every bushel weighed, every egg counted, every penny of seed debt recorded in a hand so neat the bank clerk in town once asked who they'd hired. When her mother died of fever, the winter Etta turned 11, the ledger passed to her the way other families pass down a Bible. She kept it the same way her mother had. Exactly. To the penny. Her father was not a dishonest man, but he was a tired one, and tired men remarry for reasons that have little to do with love. The woman he brought home 2 years later arrived with 2 nearly grown sons, a talent for rearranging a household, and a firm opinion that a girl hunched over account books was a girl avoiding useful work. Etta learned to do her figures by lamplight after the dishes were done. She learned to keep her mouth shut when the older stepbrother, Del, came back from town with less money than the hogs had sold for, and a story that didn't hold together. She learned that in her father's new house, the truth was not a currency everyone accepted. What finally happened was small, the way the things that break a family usually are. In the autumn of 1891, the farm sold its wheat through a cooperative arrangement Del had negotiated, and Del brought home the settlement papers for her father to sign. Her father, whose eyes were going, asked Etta to read the figures. She read them. Then she read them again, because the weight recorded on the settlement was 400 bushels short of the weight she had recorded at the scale herself, standing in the dust with her mother's ledger under her arm. She said so. She said it at the supper table, plainly, with the ledger open to the page, because she did not know another way to say a true thing. Del called her a liar. The stepmother called her ungrateful. Her father looked at the ledger, and looked at his new wife, and looked at his hands and said nothing at all, and that nothing was the loudest thing Etta ever heard. 3 days later, the arrangement, as the stepmother called it, had run its course. She was 18 years old. She had a carpetbag, her mother's ledger, 1 good wool shawl, and $11 saved from 4 summers of keeping books for the grain elevator in town. She stood at the depot and looked at the fare board and bought a ticket for as far west as $10 would carry her, because west was where her mother had always said the country was still being added up, and someone would need to do the adding. $10 carried her to the end of a spur line in the Colorado mountains, to a town called Cinder Creek that had been built in a hurry 30 years earlier and had been quietly coming apart ever since. It sat in a steep gulch below the tree line, a single crooked street of false-fronted buildings, a mercantile, a church, a livery, a bank with real brick and real pretensions, and above the town, on the mountainsides, the black mouths of mines that had mostly stopped speaking. In 1861, there had been 3,000 people in that gulch. By the autumn of 1891, there were maybe 400, and half of them were only staying because leaving required money. She stepped off the train with $1 left in the world, and she did what she had always done when she didn't know what else to do. She started counting. She counted the boarded buildings on the street, 11. She counted the ones with smoke in the chimney, 9. And she stopped counting in front of the 12th building, the one that sat by itself at the upper end of the street where the road bent toward the mines, because it was the only building in Cinder Creek with iron shutters, and because the faded lettering across its false front, bleached almost to nothing by 30 winters of sun, still said what it had always said. E. Thorne, Assayer, gold and silver, honest weights, honest weights. She stood in the cold street with her carpetbag in her hand and read those 2 words for a long time. The building was a wreck, and she could see that from the street. The porch roof had folded down over one corner like a hat brim. The iron shutters were rusted the color of dried blood, streaking the clapboards beneath them. The stone chimney had shed its top courses into the weeds. A county notice, itself years old, was nailed to the door. Seized for taxes, offered at public sale, no bidders. There had been no bidders for 10 years. In a town where buildings could be had for the cost of their back taxes, nobody had wanted this one at any price. She found out why at the bank, because the bank was where the county's business was done, and the bank was where Cornelius Price had spent 30 years growing stout behind a walnut desk. Price looked at the girl in the dusty calico dress and at her $1 on his blotter, and he laughed, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. The Thorne place, he told her, was a carcass. Roof gone spongy, floor heaved by frost, and a great iron vault in the back room that nobody had ever been able to open. Elias Thorne had died in 1866 without telling a soul the combination, and the door had defeated every man who'd tried it since. The county would sell her the building for her $1, Price said, because the county was tired of owning it. But he told her plainly, sliding the paper across for her signature, that she was buying a ruin with a locked box in it, and that the smartest thing she could do was strip the iron, sell it for scrap, and use the money to leave. The vault hasn't opened in 25 years, he said. It never will. Nothing in this town does. She signed her name, Etta Rowan, in her mother's neat hand, and pushed the $1 across the desk, and the men loafing by the bank stove chuckled into their collars. And by supper it was all over town that some half-grown Kansas girl had paid cash money for the Thorne place. The mercantile keeper's wife said the child must be simple. The men at the livery made bets on whether she'd last until the first snow. Cinder Creek had watched a lot of people arrive with big ideas and leave with nothing, and it had learned to laugh early, before it got attached. The first night she slept on the floor of the front room in her shawl, between a stack of collapsed shelving and a counter still scarred with the burns of 30-year-old acid, and she listened to the wind work at the broken porch and told herself she had not made a mistake. It did not entirely work. Kicked out was a phrase she carried like a stone in her boot. Every step reminded her. But somewhere in the cold hours she remembered the lettering on the false front, and it settled her strangely. Honest weights. Whoever Elias Thorne had been, he had thought those words worth painting largest. She began the way her mother would have, with an inventory. 2 days, top to bottom, everything written in the back pages of the ledger. Front room, 1 long counter, oak, salvageable, 1 wall of sample shelving, collapsed, the wood good. A cast iron stove, flue choked with swallow nests but sound. Behind the front room, the workroom. A stone furnace built into the chimney breast, crucibles still on their rack fuzzed gray with dust, a shelf of reagent bottles with the labels gone to lace, and a wonderful thing. A precision balance in a glass case, its brass pans dulled to the color of an old penny, but its knife edges. When she blew the dust away and touched the beam, still swinging true. She stood, watching that balance find its level in the ruined room, and felt something in her own chest do the same. And behind the workroom, the vault room. It was the reason the building had iron shutters, a chamber of dressed stone at the very back, no window but a single barred slit high in the side wall, and filling most of it the vault itself, a black iron door taller than she was, set into a masonry front, its combination dial frozen with rust, its maker's plate still legible. Hall's Safe and Lock, Coachy, Cincinnati. She put her palm flat against the iron. It was colder than the room, the way iron always is, as if it kept its own weather. 25 years, Price had said. She left her hand there a moment anyway, the way you'd rest a hand on a big animal to let it learn you, and then she went back to work, because the roof would not wait for mysteries. She had no money, so she paid with the only thing she had, labor and arithmetic. It was old Amos Tull at the livery who gave her the opening. Amos was 70-some, wiry as fence wire, with white stubble and suspenders and a business drowning in its own paperwork since his wife had died. Feed bills unsent, board unpaid, a coffee can of receipts he was frightened of. Etta sat down with the can one afternoon, and by lamplight turned chaos into columns, and found $41 owed to Amos that Amos hadn't known to collect. He stared at the page the way men stare at conjuring. After that, she had the loan of his tools, the loan of his ladder, scrap lumber from his loft, and, worth more than all of it, the loan of his standing. When old Amos Tull started eating his dinner on a crate in front of the Thorne place, watching the Kansas girl shingle a roof, the laughter in Cinder Creek lost some of its confidence. She worked through October the way water works, patiently, finding every gap. She jacked the porch and sistered the broken posts. She pried the planks off the windows and puttied glass. She fed the stove and dried the building out, board by board, until it stopped smelling like a grave and started smelling like wood smoke and pine pitch. The mercantile keeper's wife, who had called her simple, sent over a crock of beans one evening without a word, the way proud people apologize. There were nights that tested her. The first hard freeze came in late October and found the gaps she'd missed, and she woke with frost on the inside of the glass and her water bucket frozen to the floor, and lay in her blankets doing the coldest kind of arithmetic, the kind where you count what's left and divide it by the winter ahead. She had beans, flour, coffee, and credit for nothing. She thought about the stepmother's warm kitchen exactly once, deliberately, the way you press a bruise to see if it still hurts. And then she got up and lit the stove and went back to work, 'cause the building was the only thing in her life that got better when she touched it, and there is a medicine in that no doctor can bottle. And in the evenings, when her hands were too raw to hold a hammer, Etta cleaned the workroom, the crucibles, the reagent shelf, the beautiful balance, and read the only book Elias Thorne had left behind, a water-stained assayer's manual with his own marginal notes in a small, upright, uncompromising hand. Weigh twice, one note said. Certify once. It was the walls that gave up the secret, and it was her mother's arithmetic that made them do it. In the second week of November, with the first snow already down and the vault room the last room left to clean, Etta was whitewashing the stone when she noticed what her eye had been telling her quietly for days. The room was wrong. Not badly wrong. Wrong, the way Dell's settlement papers had been wrong, by a margin most people would never check. She stepped it off. The vault room, inside, was 3 feet shorter than the building was outside. She stepped it off again with a string and a stick of charcoal, measuring like her mother, twice, and the answer came back the same. Behind the back wall of the vault chamber, between the dressed stone and the rear clapboards of the building, there was a space almost 3 feet deep and as wide as the room, and no door into it, from anywhere. She stood a long time in the lamplight with the string in her hands. Then she began, very carefully, to look at the wall itself. The stones were laid dry-faced and tight, a mason's work, except in one place. Low on the wall, in the corner the vault's iron flank left in permanent shadow, there was a course of stones where the mortar was not mortar at all, but a gray-tinted plaster, dressed to fool the eye. It had fooled every eye for 25 years. It did not fool a lamp held at a raking angle, and a girl who measured everything twice. She worked the blade of a putty knife into the seam, and the plaster came away in dry curls, and behind it a single, wide stone sat proud of its fellows by a quarter-inch, with 2 shallow finger-holds cut into its bottom edge where the shadow pooled. She set down the lamp. She got her fingers into the holds. The stone slid out toward her, grinding heavier than a stove lid, and she lowered it to the floor and knelt there in the sudden draft of old, closed air and looked into the dark. Behind the vault, everyone had spent a quarter-century failing to open, and understood all at once that the vault had been the decoy. The iron door with its frozen dial had stood 25 years like a soldier at attention, drawing every greedy eye, while the real hiding place waited 3 feet behind it in the dark. Inside, on a shelf of planed boards, sat a bundle wrapped in oilcloth and tied with waxed cord, square-cornered and deliberate, placed there by hands that had known exactly what they were doing. And on top of the bundle, weighted with a smooth creekstone, lay an envelope. The ink had browned, but the hand was small, upright, uncompromising the hand from the margins of the manual. It said, "For the one who measures." Her fingers were not entirely steady when she opened it. If you are reading this, the letter began, "Then you found what the greedy could not, because you found it the way I hid it, by paying attention." I ask your patience now because I have waited a long time to explain myself, and a man only gets to do it once. His name was Elias Thorne, and he had come to Cinder Creek in 1859 with a balance, a Bible, and a conviction that the two were related. For 7 years he had been the Gulch's assayer, the man whose certificate turned rock into money, and he had painted honest weights on his false front because in a boom camp that phrase was nearly a joke, and he had wanted it known he wasn't telling it. Then, in the spring of 1864, a speculator named Silas Marsh had brought him samples from a new claim on the north slope, the Copperhead, and asked for a certificate to show investors. Thorne ran the assay. He ran it twice because he ran everything twice, and twice the numbers told him the same story. The ore was salted. Gold dust blasted into barren rock with a shotgun. The oldest swindle in the mountains, dressed up in fresh samples. Marsh, when Thorne told him, had not even bothered to deny it. He had simply named a figure, a share of the stock sales, more money than the assay office would earn in 10 years for a signature on one piece of paper. And when Thorne refused, Marsh had smiled, the letter said, like a man who had already priced the alternative. The alternative was simple. Marsh found another signature, a drunk assayer 2 camps over who would certify his own hanging for a bottle, and the Copperhead stock sold and sold and sold to shopkeepers and miners and widows the length of the gulch. And then Marsh began, patiently and thoroughly, to ruin the man who had said no. Whispers first, that Thorne's weights were short, that his certificates couldn't be trusted, that he'd tried to squeeze Marsh for a bribe and invented the salting story when he was refused. Then the freight company stopped carrying his acid. Then the bank, the same brick bank under Price's predecessor, called his note. By the winter of 1865, the miners were riding 2 days to have their samples run elsewhere, and Elias Thorne was sitting alone in his office with his true numbers, learning what they cost. The Copperhead collapsed in the spring of 1866, exactly as his assays had promised. Marsh was gone by then, east, rich, and the ruined families of Cinder Creek who could not reach Marsh settled their anger on the man who had failed to save them, never quite believing, or never quite wanting to believe, that he had tried. I write this in October of 1866, the letter said. My heart is not sound, and the doctor at the Springs does not lie to me, which I count a professional courtesy. I have no family living. What I have is in this bundle, and I will tell you what it is and what I want. The first thing was his ledger, the true ledger, every assay he had ever run, including 3 runs of copperhead ore with the salting worked out to the grain, dated and witnessed by his own methodical hand, alongside copies of the fraudulent certificates Marsh had bought elsewhere. Proof, the letter said, for whenever proof might matter. A lie has a long life, but a true number does not rot. The second thing was his savings, 7 years of honest work in a boom camp, converted the only way a man with no faith left in banks could convert it, into the metal itself. 12 canvas pouches of clean placer gold, refined in his own furnace, and beneath them, wrapped separately, 4 retort bars stamped with his own mark, E.T., and their true weight. He set the weight down, plainly, in troy ounces in that upright hand, and Etta, who by now had read enough of the manual to do the arithmetic, sat back on her heels on the cold stone floor and did it twice, because she did everything twice, and both times it came to a little more than $6,000. In a town where she had bought a building for 1. I could have left this to the county, the letter finished, or to the church, or to no one. But money is like a certificate. It is only as good as the hands that sign for it. So I have hidden it where only a certain kind of person will ever find it. Not the strongest, not the luckiest, but the one who measures. Whoever you are, you have already shown me your character. The gold is yours. The ledger is a debt. Somewhere down the years, the people this camp broke are owed a true accounting, and I could not live to give it. Weigh twice. Certify once. E. Thorne. She untied the waxed cord with cold fingers and folded back the oilcloth, and the lamplight found the gold, the way lamplight always finds gold, instantly, as if it had been waiting for exactly that. The pouches were small and shockingly heavy, each one tied and tagged in Thorne's hand with its weight to the pennyweight, and when she loosened the throat of the first one and tipped a little into her palm, it lay there dense and warm-colored and utterly indifferent. The same metal that had built the town and salted the copperhead and ruined the man who refused to lie about it. Beneath the pouches, in a nest of wool, the 4 retort bars sat like small, dark loaves, each stamped E.T., each stamped with its true weight, because of course they were. Even his treasure was a certificate. She weighed 1 pouch that night on his balance, against his tags, with her breath held, and it came true to the grain 25 years later, and she put her hand over her mouth and sat very still, because there are moments when a number is the most eloquent thing in the world. She sat with the letter until the lamp burned low. Outside, the snow came down on Cinder Creek on the bank and the livery in the 11 boarded buildings, and inside the vault room, an 18-year-old girl who had been thrown away by her own family for reading a number, out loud, sat holding the last testament of a man who had been thrown away by a whole town for doing the same. She did not feel lucky. Luck was not the right word for it, and she knew it even then. She felt recognized, across 25 years by a dead man's handwriting, and that is a rarer thing than luck, and heavier. She told Amos first, because trust has an order to it. The old man came and looked into the space behind the wall and took off his hat. Not for the gold, she noticed, but when she read him the letter. Amos had been in the Gulch in the 60s. He remembered Thorne, a stiff, unsmiling man you couldn't like and couldn't cheat. He remembered the copperhead, too, because his own father-in-law had put $200 into it and gone to his grave calling Thorne a crook for not stopping him. Half the old families in this gulch got bit by that claim, Amos said quietly, and they've been telling it wrong for 30 years. Then he looked at her, shrewd under the white brows. "What'll you do, girl?" What she did first was arithmetic, because that was her nature. She banked nothing with Price. Thorne's letter had cured her of any temptation there, But she sold one retort bar through the smelter at the Springs, above board, taxes paid, and with the proceeds she did 3 things in the spring of 1892. She finished the building properly. Sound roof, glazed windows, the iron shutters wire-brushed and painted, and the false front repainted by a sign man from Leadville. The same layout, the same words, because they had been true when nobody believed them, and she meant to make them true again. Except the name. E. Thorne, it still said, in memoriam at the top, and beneath it, larger, E. Rowan, Assayer, gold and silver, honest weights. She was not licensed yet, so she apprenticed herself by mail and by manual, ran practice assays every night on Thorne's balance until her numbers matched the smelter's to the grain, and passed her examination at the Springs before a bored state man who told her she was the first woman he'd certified and the first candidate of any kind who'd checked his arithmetic on the fee. The second thing she did was the debt. She spent that winter with Thorne's true ledger and the county records, and by spring she had a list. Every family in the Gulch that had bought Copperhead stock on the strength of a bought certificate. 31 names. Some gone, some dead, 11 still in Cinder Creek. She could not give them back their $200 each. Even $6,000 does not stretch to undo a swindle grown 30 years of interest. What she gave them instead was the accounting Thorne had promised. She invited them to the assay office, the building half of them still crossed the street to avoid, and she laid the true ledger open on the oak counter next to the fraudulent certificates, and she walked them through the numbers, column by column, the way her mother had taught her, until the arithmetic did what arithmetic does and the lies 30 years old fell apart on the counter in front of them. "There are men," Amos said later, "who dug for 50 years in this gulch, and never unburied anything as heavy as what came out of that ledger." An old woman named Prudence Kittredge, whose husband had died still cursing Thorne's name, stood a long time over the page, with her lips moving, doing the figures herself. Then she said, to no one in particular, we owed that man an apology, and we paid it to his grave with weeds. The town took up a collection that summer. Nobody organized it exactly. It organized itself, and put an iron fence and a proper stone on Elias Thorne's grave. The stone says, "He weighed true." Etta chose the words, but the town paid for them. And in a town like Cinder Creek, that distinction is everything. And the third thing, she opened the doors. Not just the assay office, though the assay office prospered beyond anyone's guess, because it turned out the mines above Cinder Creek had not failed so much as given up. And when there was an honest scale at the bottom of the gulch again, men began bringing rock down the mountain again, and 2 of the old claims reopened within the year on the strength of her certificates, and the spur line added a second weekly train. But she opened the building, too, in the plainer sense. The front room, warm around Thorne's old stove, became the place where Cinder Creek did its figuring, where miners brought their contracts before signing, where the mercantile keeper's wife learned double entry at the counter on slow afternoons, where old Amos held court on his crate, where anyone with papers they didn't trust could get a second pair of eyes for free. Price, watching his bank's authority leak up the street to a calico dress and a brass balance, came around in the autumn of 1892 with an offer to buy the building for $400. It was, he pointed out, 400 times what she had paid. Etta thanked him and told him the arithmetic was impressive, but the item wasn't for sale, and offered kindly and in front of witnesses to check the bank's ledgers any time he liked. He did not take her up on it. But it was noticed in town that from that season on, the bank's figures got very careful indeed. A letter reached her that winter, forwarded twice in handwriting she knew. Her father. Dell's cooperative had collapsed under the weight of its own settlements. The farm was mortgaged. The family had heard, the stepmother had heard, Etta read between the lines that Etta had come into property out west. And blood, her father wrote, was blood. She sat with that letter one long evening by the stove, and Amos, who missed nothing, asked if it was bad news. Old news, she said. She sent no money. She sent instead a single page in her mother's neat hand. The wheat settlement of 1891, copied from memory, the true weights in one column and Dell's figures in the other, and beneath them, one line. The books were right. I hope you are well. She had learned that from Thorne, she said later, that you owe people the accounting, not the apology. Her father never wrote back. Some ledgers do not balance in one generation, and she had made her peace with carrying the remainder. If you go to Cinder Creek today, and you can, the Gulch Road is paved now, and the town survived the century that killed its neighbors, which the local history pamphlet attributes to the mines, but the old families attribute to something else. The building is still there, at the bend where the street turns toward the mountain. The iron shutters are still on it. The false front still carries both names. Inside, under glass where the sample shelves used to be, sit a brass balance, a water-stained manual, an envelope addressed in browned ink, and a ledger lying open to a page from 1864, and schoolchildren are brought there every year to hear the story of the man who weighed true and died for it, and the girl with $1 who dug his name out from behind a wall. The vault is there too, at the back. They got it open eventually, years later, with a locksmith from Denver and a great deal of ceremony, the whole town packed into the street to see. It was empty. It had always been empty. People still laugh about that, and it is the kind of laughter that has forgiveness in it. There is a certain kind of inheritance that does not pass through families. It waits in buildings, in books, in old handwriting, for the person who will recognize it, and it recognizes them right back. The world had told Etta Rowan she was worthless, the same way it had told that building it was worthless, with a locked door and a low price. It only ever takes one person who measures for themselves to prove the world's arithmetic wrong. Etta Rowan was 18 years old and kicked out. She had $1 to her name, and she spent it on a boarded-up gold assay office in a dying Colorado mining town. It was the best dollar she ever spent. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, what's a truth someone kept safe until you were ready to find it? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.